All right, so stumbled across another video here with this woman's name is April Melvin, and like I said, in some videos, I don't typically respond to things I see on social media, but this particular issue is something I'm really deeply concerned with, and I like to think my concern is has to do with simply the family structure and the importance of the family structure and the order of creation. She actually says, I need to find it, but she says she has a video that deals with the order of creation, and how she tries to deal with Genesis and creation. And I would be very interested in watching that. But she's going to go into First Timothy chapter 2 here. I've dealt with some of her discussions in First Timothy chapter 2 briefly, but again, we're going to go through this one here. The argument she's basically going to make, and she's going to go into the Greek here, um, and she's look. I like I said, Greek is not my strong suit. I was starting to learn Greek for a while, and I just gave up on it because I just moved on to something else. I did learn the alphabet, and I can sound out the words, but I don't really know what I'm saying, so I have to always look it up. So my Greek is obviously not up to par, and I don't even know if hers is, to be honest with you. I mean, she makes these big points about imperatives and indicatives and stuff like that. I'm just thinking, I don't know, the way she says it, it just sounds like somebody who doesn't even know much herself. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong, but it's just kind of what it comes across as to me. So either way, but I know for certain that I'm not up to par on the Greek. That's not my strong suit. Let's just be honest, that's not most of us. But I don't need to know the Greek to know that her interpretation of First Timothy chapter 2 is just wrong. Um, a lot of one of the things here that happens with people who are teaching stuff like this, stuff that's just false, just not true, is and I don't want people to misunderstand me here, okay? I'm not saying this is just a figure of speech. I'm not saying that she is of the devil. I'm not saying that at all. But there's that figure of speech, the devil lies in the details. And I think there's similarity here in where sometimes what people will do, they'll try to go so far into the details of the grammar and stuff like that to try and just confuse you, to make it sound like they're saying something when they're not actually saying really much at all. And if you just know how to kind of, if I don't think as important as understanding the original language is. Here's the thing. And I know people like James White's gonna probably disagree with me. It's okay. I'm not the biggest James White fan anymore anyway. I like him, but I don't, I don't follow him dogmatically anymore. But I don't think it's necessary for everybody well, and even he would say this too, but you don't need to know the Greek. Now, if you're going to be a pastor, I get it, a minister, sure. But for you and me, lay people, we don't need to know the Greek. There's no real need to know how to read Greek. Knowing how Greek words function in certain points in Scripture, sure, that's useful. But to know the Greek language, we don't necessarily need to know that. You can trust that the translations that you are reading are reliable. They are telling you probably not. I mean, it's beneficial like John 1:1, right? And not even just that, just John 1 in general. It is definitely beneficial to know um the Greek and how it's functioning in that it opens up that passage even more when you understand the Greek. But for the most part, other than passages kind of like that, you just need to have just just a nice solid English translation. That's all you need. A good English translation that's faithful to the translation. You don't need to know Greek participles. You don't need to know how the articles are functioning, or the imperatives and the indicatives. You don't need to know any of that stuff. She's gonna try and make it sound like, she's got this great arguments because she knows imperatives and indicatives. But I'm gonna show you how none of that really matters in the end. Her argument, none of it really matters. We're gonna dive into that and show that just like if you just read the passage, if you just read it, It's going to answer the questions for you. Okay. So let's, and now that being said, she's going to make the point here that in First Timothy chapter 2, what Paul is just saying when he says he does not permit a woman to teach, he's just saying that, that's not a blanket command, across the board. That's just like a thing that, like, they, until they're ready, kind of thing, like that, like in the meantime, sort of thing, like they need to, or that they also need to learn. She's going to say, like, women need to learn. They need to learn, and Paul is saying that they need to learn things, and they're just like men. They need to, that's what she's going to try to argue. Now, if you just read First Timothy chapter 2 and chapter 3, you're never going to come away with this argument at all. You only come away with it when you are trying to make something out of it. That's the only way you're ever going to get something from it. Okay, I got a text message here. I'm just going to look at it real quick. Oh, cool. Neato. All right, so let's listen to what she has to say, and we will react to it. I'll show you what the big problem is with all the egalitarian arguments of First Timothy chapter
All
2
right,
and
there's
3.
only one command in First Timothy 2, and it is not that I don't permit a woman to teach a man. That's not the command. So the problem is we are reading this letter as though it was originally written in English, and it was actually originally written in Greek. And
Sure, yeah. I mean, yeah, obviously it was written in Greek, and she's gonna say here in a moment. Watch.
Greek grammar structure is very different from the English grammar structure, which is why the English has it flip flopped.
So you hear what she's saying here? I don't even know if she's intending to say this. I don't know if she means to say this, but what she's saying to you is the English. She's kind of implicitly implying what I said isn't true. That the English translations, they flip things around and they just kind of go weird with it and stuff. Um, that's not. I don't think that that's necessarily true. Now, look, there in Greek, the most important thing is how the word is functioning, not exactly where it is in the sentence. Okay, so in English, for instance, um, typically you put the subject before the verbs and things like that. When you talk, you're the subject usually comes first, and then there's an order in which English sentences generally function. In Greek, that doesn't really matter. So again, in John 1:1, in the word, or in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God. And then in clause 3, I remember this. In clause 3, it says, "And God was the word," which, of course, in English, it doesn't say that. It says, "And the word was God." The reason being is because in the English, the word, the subject, is usually comes first. That you say the subject first, and then you do the descriptions of the subject, or the verbing that belongs to the subject, whatever, etc. So, but in Greek, that doesn't really matter. None of that really matters. So there is some truth to it, but also she's doing here is she's gonna just try and use this to like say basically what she's doing this, so don't believe, kind of like the don't believe your lying eyes kind of thing. When you read First Timothy chapter 2, you shouldn't read it as what it appears to you on the page. There's more going on, and you need to know it's kind of what the Greek is saying to know. That's the same thing as me saying you can't really truly understand John 1:1 unless you know it in the Greek. Now that's not even true. That's not true. You can still read John 1:1 in English and get the meaning. You may not be able to get the meaning in its full depth, but you can understand what John is saying very clearly in John 1:1. So what she's saying here is only partially true, but again, this thing that the devil lies in the details. And I'm not saying she's the devil, but I'm just saying that phrase, the devil lies in the details. And I like this saying. I remember who said it. Somebody said it to me. There's nothing more obscuring than technicalities. So, anyways,
When we read, I do not permit, that sounds to our English speaking ears like, oh, that is an ironclad law. She's not allowed to teach men, right? And then the other one, let her learn, that sounds like a suggestion. Like, well, if she feels like it, go ahead, I guess.
that never occurred to me at all. I have it right here, First Corinthians chapter 2, the passage she's talking about. A woman must learn quietly with all submissiveness, but I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. She must remain quiet. Um, where was the part? Oh yeah, a woman must learn. Okay, yeah, so a woman must learn. I mean, there's nothing there that implies, you know, that she, she could, she may. The actual what's funny here is she's gonna say, I mean, she's gonna talk about how the extremities of what Paul is saying here, stuff like that. But the real extreme thing of what Paul's statement is here, the most incredible thing about verse 11, chapter 2, verse 11, is not what she's going to say, is that women do have the ability to teach and lead churches and authority. It's actually the fact that women can learn it all. In the ancient world, women really weren't permitted to learn at all. I mean, you can go here to verse on note 17 or verse 18. Says, although the Greek conjunction "de" can have a simple connective force, and it is best to take it verse 11. Verse 11 gives a positive statement, that is to say that a woman should learn. This was radical and liberating departure, radical and liberating departure from the Jewish view that women were not to learn the law. So that's the actual incredible thing about what Paul's saying. It's not really what she's trying to say that Paul's saying. But again, there's nothing in this that's saying that's suggestive, whatever. Anyways, all right, so let's continue on.
As let her learn. The Greek is the opposite because Greek verbs.
The Greek is the opposite. See, this is what I have a problem with what she's saying. Which maybe she doesn't mean to say this, but what she's implying here with the Greek is the opposite of what the text is saying. How can you trust your English translations then? If the Greek is saying the opposite of what the English is saying, then our English translations are not trustworthy. So I'm not trying to fault her too much for this, but I would just recommend that she be a little bit more careful with what she's saying. Okay. Um, I would not say that the Greek is the opposite of what the text is saying in the English translations. That would be tantamount to saying that the English translations are just flat out wrong. If one's going this way and what's opposites it means one's going that way and one's going the other way. It means they're totally different directions. They're incompatible with one another. That's what opposites mean in that general sense. So, anyways, I would not frame it the way she's framing it. I don't think she's doing it intentionally, but anyways.
Have moods. There is the mood of command and there is the mood of statement. And the mood of command in First Timothy 2 is the learn. The learn is the imperative.
See, I know this is what kind of where I'm thinking. I don't think that she herself actually knows the Greek here. I don't think she does. I think she knows a few facts, like I just showed you. I know a few facts about the Greek because I did sort of a surface level study of Greek some time ago and gave up on it because I'm very poorly disciplined and I was just got distracted by other things. And there you go. But the way she's talking right here, she's I don't know, it just sounds like she's kind of correcting herself a little bit. And there's other obviously we make mistakes when we talk, sure. But I don't know. There's something different about like when I listen to like Dan Wallace, right, talk about the Greek. I mean, there's a level of confidence that he conveys that just shows that the dude clearly, I mean, it is like a second language to the guy. For her, it's like she's trying to remember certain principles. She's trying to recall certain principles, and then as you're recalling them, sometimes you get some words mixed up, whatever, and you got to kind of pause and go, wait a minute, hold on, no, that's not right, and then you just change. Let's go back real quickly. Just go back a little bit. I don't want to psychoanalyze too much here, but
52 is the learn. The learn
see how she looks away a little bit. I mean, just
it is the imperative here.
so she's looking. She keeps looking away. She's looking to her screen somewhere else, and so that's just telling me that. And I make a big point about this is the reason why I'm making a big point about this. Like I just admitted to you, I don't really know the Greek too much at all. I can sound out words. That's about it. And I know a few words here and there. Like I can spot a word like agape. I'll be like, oh, look, there's agape. Oh, there's logos, and oh, there's autu, and things like that. I can kind of those little things. But I'm very honest about that. And so I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about technicalities of the Greek language. And I think that's what she's doing. Look, if you don't actually know the language, you probably shouldn't just be talking about it. Just and oh, you mansplaining, but I've just admitted to you that I don't know much about it, and so I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to talk about something I don't really know anything about. Don't talk about things that you don't really know anything about. Just saying. I'm just saying.
So it isn't, oh, you know what, allow her to land. No, this is a command. She must learn. Teach her. And at that time, women were not allowed theological education. And so Paul is putting this on its head and saying, no, 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 no. Listen, all this false teaching and this stuff that's going on, take a step. Let her learn. She must be taught. Now, the mood of the mood of statement.
See, there she goes again. She's she's trying to recall information. The body language there is very clearly of somebody who's trying to recall something that is not sitting in their head, that is just so of years and years, and maybe even I don't no, let's not put decades on her. I mean, she's clearly not that old, like Dan Wallace would be. Sorry, Dan, if he ever sees this, but like guys like Dan, he doesn't have to do stuff like that. I mean, he just knows it. Just he's done it for decades, longer than I've been alive. Either of us, you know. But she's very clearly, this is not something that is second nature to her.
Is that next line down? I'm not permitting her. Present tense, right? This is Paul reporting. It's not a good practice for someone who hasn't learned to be teaching people. That just makes sense, right? And so the command is let her learn, and until she.
So I'm gonna go back here a little bit, okay? Everything changes when she inserts the term present tense.
To be teaching people. That just makes sense, right? And so the command is let her learn, and until she's taught, this is Paul reporting. It's not a good practice for someone who hasn't learned to be teaching people. That just makes sense, right? And so the command is let her learn, and until she's taught, right? We're not going to let her teach people. We're not going to let her teach men. That doesn't make sense. And we'll get going on. Take a second.
Sorry.
Let her learn. She must be taught. Now, the mood of statement is that next line down. I'm not permitting her. Present tense.
Okay. This is where so she from up to this point, she's actually been fairly accurate. I mean, it was a radical idea that women were actually to be taught the law. Yes, very radical. And Paul is saying that they should learn. Yep, she's right. But then we get to this point right here, the present tense. Now, like I said, I don't know the Greek well enough to tell you what present tense is, where the present tense is at. I know the English, the way the English puts it, and I trust the English, especially in the NET. The NET, they explain their translational preferences too in their notes. So I trust it very well when it says, you know, a woman must learn. Um, so learning here, present tense. I'm assuming that that is in the present tense. Okay, maybe that's what she's talking about. Um, and there is truth to that. Now, what do we? But the point is the question then is, what do we mean by present tense? Do we mean present tense as in her current state of education, or do we mean present tense as in like just she should be taught right now? You know, like she should be taught presently in this moment, I guess. You know, whatever. I think that what she's going to try to flip it in as the present tense, as the present tense just what it means actually means is in her current state, to get her to a state where she can be a teacher. That's where she's going to flip it. So what you're going to see here is the subtle shift, and she's going to flip this entire text to be saying that to basically say that what Paul is saying here is that she is to learn until she's ready to teach. That's the way. That's how she's going to twist this.
Right? This is Paul reporting. It's not a good practice for someone who hasn't learned to be teaching people. That just makes sense, right? And so the command is let her learn, and until she's taught, right? We're not going to let her teach people.
See what you did there? You see what you did? She's used the present tense to basically say in her current state of education, she's not to use that and say what that therefore Paul is saying the current state of education means she's not ready. And then until she's ready, she is to learn. That's the shift. That's where the best, deceptions, they use truth and they twist it. And it's up to, Charles Spurgeon said discernment is knowing the difference between right and almost right. So basically, um, when you're it's the ability to see at the very moment when someone, they twisted it right there, and it can be so subtle, very very subtle, that you don't even know where the heck did we go off the railroad tracks. Are we off the road? Maybe we're still on them, and she's actually got a point. It's hard to tell. You got to be able to spot exactly when they do it.
We're not going to let her teach men. That doesn't make sense. And we'll get into the authentine because that is a really important verb as well in the next few videos. But I do want to talk about this difference between the mood of command and the mood of statement.
She makes this big deal about the mood of command and the mood of statement. And again, I don't think she actually knows the Greek. So I don't think she actually even knows what she's talking about here.
The imperative versus the indicative, because it is a major determining factor when you're reading the Greek here. The command is to teach her. The statement is, I'm not permitting in this moment. That's how the grammar is set up.
No, and it's not. All right, so
and listen,
hold on.
Tomorrow I'm going to go over the complementarian arguments on this. You are welcome to comment today, though, because I'm shocked that my complementarians who have been screaming in my comment section, oh, what about 1 Timothy 2, right? You guys have been oddly silent on the videos where I'm going through 1 Timothy 2. So please comment here and then come back tomorrow when I go through the complementarian arguments and why I'm still not convinced that this is Paul's universal ban on women teaching men.
Okay, so she wants us, she wants the challenge. Challenge me on this. Okay, let's open up First Timothy chapter 2, and we're gonna go into chapter 3. And I don't, look, I don't. Will I convince her? Probably not. Okay, um, probably not, and that's unfortunate. But she guys are being oddly quiet. Let's go into it then. But we don't really need to dig into too much. Okay, I just have a couple questions for April here. I just have a couple questions based on First Timothy chapter 2 and chapter 3. Well, mostly chapter 3, actually, to be honest with you. In chapter 2, of course, we have the statements that women are to be submissive. I think the real offense is people don't like that word, submissive. And speaking, it's funny because she said a while ago in the video, the Greeks, they back in Paul's day, they talked a little bit differently, and they said these, so to them the word submissive wouldn't have been offensive, but to us in our modern culture, our modern liberal worldviews, where we're all free and we're all autonomous, the word submissive is very offensive to us in general. Let's just be honest, okay? But it's actually not the same way slavery. I mean, the biblical terms use of slavery very different than the way we have been conditioned to think of slavery today. So, but we have this, women must learn to all submissive. I don't, allow women to teach or exercise authority. Okay, so Paul just said that she must remain quiet. And again, it's another phrase that we get offended by today, and that's why we want to change this passage. But again, I don't think in that day that this was something very offensive to us. In our modern day culture, it is. But let's go down to chapter 3. So she wants to try and say, look, chapter 2, all it was saying is that she has to be quiet and learn until she's ready to learn. I would just, first of all, I would just ask anybody, please, just when you read First Timothy chapter 2, can you find anywhere in this the idea that Paul was saying, when you just read the text, anywhere that Paul was saying, she's remaining quiet until she's ready, until she's learned this, until she's learned properly, and then she can teach. Any positive statements about women being able to teach? Are there any positive statements anywhere in Paul's teaching, anywhere in Scripture? Positive statements about women being allowed to teach anywhere? I would continue there's none. I would contend that there is none. Um, Nowhere, no positive statements about women being able to actually teach. Now, let me check real quickly here. Okay, we're good. That being said, let's go down to there was something else I wanted to say, but we're going way too long here already. Let's go down to chapter 3 here. So after he just got done saying the woman is to be quiet, now Paul's going to move on to he's basically going to go, all right, now that we got that part out of the way, let's go on to who qualifies as an overseer. That's basically what he's going to do. Excuse me. And here you have in chapter 3 qualifications of an overseer. If someone aspires to the office of overseer, he, now this is supplied, it's not actually in the Greek, the pronoun he. I made that mistake in one of my last videos, but we're going to correct it right here. He desires a good work. It's not even a big one anyway, but that's not even the main point. The overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife. So, I have a question for my egalitarian friends. Um, how can a woman fulfill this? I mean, she can't have a wife, let alone be a husband. And before you tell me, you try to dive into the Greek, and I would say go ahead, do it, because it's actually in the Greek. Husband right there. And you can look there on the lower right hand screen. It says it's with reference to sex. It's of a male, a husband, a betrothed or future husband. It's clear this is a man, a betrothed man. The Greek term here being used. Let's see if I can sound that out. On I can't sound it out. I'm bad at that one. I can't figure that one out. But that is a betrothed man, a husband of one. That's ice or ace. One wife. Gunaikas, I think. Gunaikas. That's it. Of one wife, and this is a woman of any age, whether a virgin or married or a widow, a wife of a betrothed woman. That is there in the Greek. Okay, so the qualifications of an overseer is that they must be a husband, a man of one wife. How can a woman fulfill that? Now you might say, all right, fine, okay, you know what, we'll grant you that one. Okay, overseers, they got to be men. All right, fine. But deacons, deacon just means servants. And it is. That's deacon is the original term is uh, a servant. You have it right here. I'm highlighting deacon right here, and you can see there the definitions. It has a wide range of usage, and so that obviously means that you have to understand it in every context of how it's actually being used. The wider the range of usage, the more you got to pay attention to how it's being used in that context. All right, so yes, a servant, a deacon. I think it's the original term is dikaiosune. I think I could be wrong, but let's go to here, chapter 3, to deacons. Okay, so all right, fine. We'll grant you the overseer. The overseers have to be um, uh, the overseers have to be, let me quickly here. I gotta respond to this real quick. Do 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 do. I'll respond to it later. Respond in a moment. Okay, so the overseers, they can be men. All right, fine. What about deacons though? Because again, deacon servant. And Phoebe, the term used for Phoebe, what she was a servant, a deacon, a deaconess. All right, fine, let's do that. Okay, well, let's just read deacons. Deacons likewise must be diligent or dignified, sorry, not two-faced, not given to excessive drinking, not greedy for gain, holding to the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience, and these also must be tested first, and then let them serve as. Now again, and they must be tested first. There's nothing of this. The idea they have to be tested. In other words, they have to be able to prove that they have learned. None of that's up here. It's not up here at all. Nowhere. Doesn't say it anywhere. She just made that up. Anyways, but the first test and then let them serve as deacons if they are found blameless. Likewise, also their wives, there's that term again, it's right there in the Greek, wives must be dignified, not slanderous, temperate, faithful in every respect. Deacons must be the husbands of one wife. So once again, just like with overseers, the qualification of a deacon is that he must be the husband of one wife. Who are the only people who could be husbands? Men. So there's no way women qualify for this. And again, it's in the Greek. It's there, right there in the Greek. The husband of one wife. So how can women fulfill that? They can't. They can't. The assumption here, the presupposition here, is that the deacon is a man. Was it in Titus chapter 1? I mean, you know where I'm going. Um, should I even go here? Younger men to be like um, uh, okay, let's not bother with that. But okay, what about in Romans chapter, Romans chapter 16, right? Phoebe, who was a servant, you know, we even have a note here, Phoebe, in note one. It doesn't let me go to it, but there it is. Deaconess, it is debated whether diakonos, yeah, diakonos is right next to it. Here refers to the. I told you I can read it, I can like sound it out, but I can't sometimes can't understand it. But what I'm saying within the church, one contextual argument used to support this view is that Phoebe is associated with a particular church, Cenchrea, and as such would therefore be a deacon of that church. In the New Testament, some are called diakonos are related to related to a particular church. Yet the scholarly consensus is that such individuals are not deacons but servants or ministers. Other viable translations like diakonos, for example, if Epaphras is associated with the church in Colossians and is called diakonos in Colossians 1:7, but not contemporary translation regard him as deacons, but no contemporary translations regard him as a deacon. In First Timothy 4:6, Paul calls Timothy, diakonos. Timothy was associated with the church in Ephesus, but he obviously was not a deacon. In addition, the lexical evidence leans away from this view. Within the New Testament, the diakon word group rarely functions with a technical nuance. In any case, the evidence is not compelling either way. The view accepted in the translation above is that Phoebe was a servant of the church, not a deaconess, although this conclusion should be regarded as tentative. So basically, what he's saying here, what the note is saying here is, this is not conclusive. To use Phoebe here and as servant is not conclusive. It's just not. It doesn't. There is no. In a, I like to think of these discussions as if you are bringing this case to a court of law, to a jury, to present this case as without a doubt. That's what you have to do when you try to prove a case, beyond any doubt. Could you present this case? Well, to present the thesis that women can be teachers in the church, you need positive statements about women being able to teach, found in Scripture, um, and there are none. What you have are statements of like women. She uses one of her videos. She used the classic, Priscilla teaching Apollos, and she conveniently leaves out the fact that Priscilla's husband was present in that same drama event. And so, but she uses that and says, see, she's teaching. And of course, Phoebe delivering the Roman letter to the Romans usually means that Phoebe probably also explained the letter to them. And therefore, she must be teaching the letter to them. Now, again, there's problems with that too. Uh, basically the problem with that is like, I mean, there's a lot of things you're not even considering. I mean, who else could Paul have sent? Yeah, maybe Phoebe was the only one he could send. Who was the only one available, and so there was a small exception to the normal rule because for whatever reason logistics were strained. Remember, this is the early church. I mean, there's not a lot of people here involved as we have today. It's very easy to just we can walk around pretty freely these days. Back then, you really couldn't. It was very difficult, really tough, I'm sure. So sometimes you just had to work with what you had. And maybe Phoebe was one of the only ones available, and she took that on the task. And so because she did, they were like, yeah, sure, this is from Paul, and we trust Phoebe. Read us a letter. Explain to us what Paul meant in his letter. Whatever. Like that. Basically, that there are exceptions. There are period times where there can be exceptions, but that's not the norm. Now, once again, in a court of law, can you present this case as absolute without a shadow of doubt? I don't think you can. Objectively, you can't, because the best thing you have are kind of statements in passing, you know, historical accounts, and historical accounts aren't necessarily teaching you doctrine all the time. Most of the time, they're actually not. They're just telling you history, things that just happened. You really can't derive didactic teachings, which, by the way, is redundant, but didactic teachings, you can't derive those from historical passages. You get the didactic teachings from Romans. You get them from First Timothy. The points where Paul is actually specifically teaching something, important church rules, church discipline, very clear statements, very clear negative statements, as well as positive statements. The negative statements are that women are not to teach. The positive statements are that men are to teach. They're the ones qualified. I would bet, if I were a betting man, I would bet my next 5 paychecks that I would be able to prove my thesis over hers in a court of law very, very easily. So, anyways, she wanted us to tackle that, passage in First Timothy chapter 2 and 3, and we did. There you go. Went a little bit longer than what I wanted to, but this is an issue that's really important to me. I find this to be a subject that is important to talk about because the family structure, as I said in the beginning, society cannot survive without a functioning family structure where the man is the head, he is the leader, and he leads his family faithfully in love towards Christ as a servant, a good, faithful man, and protects his wife, protects his family, as well as his community, um, and his church from false teachings. Unless we have those kind of men who are leaders, the society will crumble. You can't have a functioning society without good, strong, brave men. It's just the truth of it, just the way it is. So, that being said, I hope this is helpful. Sole Deo Gloria. God bless.